Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and what I want to talk about today is criminal justice reform, a very big issue, one that's been coming up a lot lately. A lot of times when people talk about criminal justice reform, they kind of focus on one area. Oftentimes very much the enforcement side, the police and de-escalation and whatnot. But the criminal justice issue really comes out from many different levels. And in order to have a system that kind of focuses on, well, I guess the first question you have to ask yourself is what the purpose of a justice system is. Is it just to identify people who do bad things and punish them? Or is it to try to course correct, and to rehabilitate, to sit there and say, hey, you're not doing things right. Let's take a moment, see if we can get you them on the right direction. And depending on sort of which route you go, you're going to have a very different view on what. And oftentimes at the core, what it comes down to is, do you believe people can change? Do you believe that when people do bad things, is it because they're bad people or because of context? These kind of questions are going to heavily inform what your opinion is on these issues and what I'm about to say. I generally do fall on the side of rehabilitation, that people are oftentimes not bad because they're inherently bad, but oftentimes has a lot to do with either their physical situation, through context of the past. There's a book called The Moral Molecule that kind of details a lot of sort of the scientific aspects of this that I found very interesting. At the same time, also kind of detailing how people are biologically wired for free markets. Very great book, Moral Molecule by Paul Zak. But let's parse this out. Okay, so to keep it simple, when you have laws, that means anyone who's not doing what that law says is essentially committing a crime. Okay, so by nature, the first thing let's put forward is that by making more laws, by making more rules, you are creating more criminals. Because the minute you create that law, there are people who are on both sides of that line that weren't on either side of the line before because the line did not exist. Okay, so for example, if we said people who jump over 6 feet are now in violation of the law, before no one who jumped at all was a criminal, but now people who happen to jump more than 6 feet are now criminals because you passed the law. So more laws generally ends up with more criminals by definition. You're defining more activities as criminals, as crimes. So the nature of, by just statistically, you're gonna end up with more likeliness that people are committing some sort of activity that is considered a crime. Most people don't know what most crimes are. And don't realize how many crimes they actually probably commit on a daily basis, which is just a sign of a problem. Okay, if you have so many rules and the rules are so complicated that people don't even know when they're breaking them, it's probably not a good set of rules. On top of that, basically the way the legal system kind of treats, or the way people think about it, is that people magically know all the details of the rules. So for example, minimum sentencing, when we sit there and say, hey, if you commit this crime, you're going to at least get 20 years. And the reason they do that, the logic behind it is disincentive. The idea behind a lot of punishment is a disincentive. Saying, the carrot and the stick. They sit there and say, hey, you know what? If you succeed in life and you make good choices, you should get all the benefit of those choices. But if you make a mistake, we're going to hit you hard. Okay? So really just don't do this thing. Okay, so for example, something like insider trading, regardless of how you feel about insider trading, the maximum number of years in jail there is 20 years in jail. That's a long time of someone's life. And up to $5 million per account. But do most people know what these penalties are and what these minimum sentences are? So to the extent that there is a disincentive here, is questionable. There may be a disincentive in the idea that it's a crime in general, and the idea that, oh, okay, I know if I hurt someone or if I kill someone, I'm probably going to get punished. But most people who commit crimes aren't ahead of time sitting there thinking, well, before I do that, let me go check what the minimum sentencing is. So what you're doing is you're creating automatically harsh sentencing, especially in situations where it may not be warranted. This is kind of why, without minimum sentencing, the judge would have discretion, which has its own problems. Okay, because then what happens is that while the judge can be more lenient in situations that warrant it, because again, context matters, and in certain situations, it's more, doesn't necessarily excuse a crime, but it may not necessarily warrant as heavy a punishment as others. Okay, but at the same time, a judge with sort of the wrong proclivities may decide to be more harsh when they don't need to be. So there's a problem with just having sort of rule-based minimum sentencing, but it's also a problem with just judicial discretion. And a lot of that also ties extra into what's the idea of immunity within the legal system. Okay, so the idea is, the reason for this is because they don't want necessarily judges and prosecutors to be constantly worrying, oh, well, am I going to get sued if I'm pursuing justice? They want them to just pursue justice. The problem is this idea of immunity, which means if you're a prosecutor, if you're a judge, and whatever you do in the course of the law, as long as you're not like, well, basically, if you're doing your function as a judge or a prosecutor, you can't be sued. You're not legally liable, really, for anything that you do. And especially on the judicial side, this came out of a really disturbing court case called Spark v. Sporkman. And basically what happened in that case is that a mother wanted to basically tie the tubes of her little girl, and went and basically solicited the courts to do so. And the court said, fine, we'll let you basically tie the tubes of your daughter. Basically, I don't remember the exact procedure, but basically what they did is they just told her that she had an appendectomy, that they took out her appendix. And then years later, she finds out she can't have kids, sues the judge, it goes to the Supreme Court, and then basically the Supreme Court judges that he's not liable, okay? Took her ability to give her no process in which to kind of testify for herself or basically defend her own right to keep her ability to have children, but you know what, it doesn't matter. And that judges have abused that ability in some cases. Again, in some cases, again, there's two sides to every story. It's protected judges who made bold steps that might have been towards justice, that might have been against the system. That's why this issue is so complicated, because there's a reason why these things are in place, but there's a lot of damage that kind of comes from these things being in place. And also just as the career aspect, in the sense that a lot of times basically the career path for like a district attorney. So if you become a DA, a public defender, if you become a public defender, your goal is to be eventually elected as a DA. And then as a DA, you want to be eventually elected to either being a judge or attorney general of the state. And generally sort of the way most people judge someone in the criminal justice system, and this comes down to how people judge the criminal justice system, is not by how many people have rehabilitated or how have crime statistics gone, but how many people did you punish? How much money did you collect from the people that you punish? Okay, and this is where we start getting into like civil asset forfeiture and asset forfeiture in general. It basically creates an incentive for people to seek more punishment when they can. And this is where you start getting into all these laws that sit there and say, well, if we can prove this about your motivation, we'll slap on a couple extra years. If we can prove this, we'll slap on a couple extra years. And what happens is most people aren't aware of all these little nuances in the law, but the lawyers are, the prosecutors are, and it becomes sort of a game for them to see how harshly can we punish you. So the additional disincentive in oftentimes having these sort of tack-on years is questionable. It's often just kind of there to basically tell the public, hey, we're doing something about it, we're making you feel good, and we're giving the prosecutor a tool to hit people even harder, okay? But then that's what happens. Everyone is always looking for reasons to be able to prosecute harder because it allows them to buy points when it comes to elections. And the question is, should judges, should people like attorney generals necessarily be elected? The question is, if they're appointed, but then appointed by who? Oftentimes, in the opposite side, they end up being appointed by people like presidents or governors. And then the result is other levels of corruption and nepotism and stuff like that. So there aren't simple answers. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up as part 1 of this video because there's a lot more to say. So I'll do a second video where I'll continue on about these criminal justice issues.